Fuzz, a moment ago you were saying, it's just part of the laws of physics that cancer happens sometimes. Let's talk a little bit about those laws of physics and what their relationship is to the fall.
Well, everyone that takes the position that there was no death before the fall also takes a position that the laws of physics in some way were radically changed at the fall. And the question is, does Scripture support that conclusion that there was a dramatic change in the laws of physics at the fall?
In particular, I think the one, second law of thermodynamics or entropy is one that comes up a lot. And maybe we should explain what that second law is so all our listeners know what that is. Fuzz or Hugh, one of you want to do that?
Well, it's described in Romans 8 as the law of corruption, the law of frustration, or the law of decay. It's alluded to, not just alluded to, talking about specifically in Revelation 21, where it talks about the new creation, where there will be no decay, no pain, no death, no suffering, no tears. I think that's critical. We're talking about suffering right now, but God has promised us there will be a new creation where there will be no suffering, no cancer, no disease, no pain. But that's not the intended situation for this present creation. It was never built that way in the beginning. Romans 8 says the entire creation has been subjected to this law of decay, not just a piece of it, but all of it. So the whole of the universe has been subjected to these laws of physics that we presently experience.
Now let me read that verse before we get too far down the road here. We're talking about Romans 8. And he kind of picks up the discussion in verse 18. I'll start there for context. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies.
Right. Well, you know that many Christians believe that proves that decay came in at the fall.
But the text never says when creation was subjected to the law of decay.
Well, I would argue that it actually does from a physicist's perspective, because it talks about the entire creation being subjected. And if you look at astrophysics, it's impossible to separate the temporalness of the universe from its spatial qualities. Space and time form an inseparable grid, the space-time fabric. So if you're saying the entirety of the creation, that means it goes all the way back to the creation event itself.
Okay, now we've said a lot of points here. I want to kind of break it down. Hugh, specifically, you're talking about verse 22, where it says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time.
Right.
So you're suggesting that phrase, the whole creation there, refers to everything in the universe, everything in the space-time.
Yeah, and I would argue that's also referred to in verse 21, that the creation itself will be liberated. It's talking about the entirety of creation being liberated from this bondage to decay. You know, what I find interesting here is that both sides of the debate agree that the laws of physics will be changed. Is this just that we have a different epoch for the change in those laws of physics? You know, we take the position they'll be changed in the future. And the other people who disagree with us take the position that it was changed in the past and will be restored to that condition in the future, whereas we're claiming that it will never be restored to what it was. It's going to be something brand new.
So what you're suggesting here is that the second law of thermodynamics, decay, death, and all of those things that go with it, was instituted from the creation, the beginning of time.
From the creation itself, I would also argue this is not the only text that deals with it. Yeah, so for those, Marj, who claim that this text is simply referring to the entirety of creation, getting this law of decay from the moment that Adam sinned, not before, they got a problem with a lot of other passages of Scripture which make it clear that this law of decay indeed was in effect before the fall.
Okay, I want to go back to a point that you made a second ago, and that is in this passage, it doesn't specifically say when this bondage to decay happened. It doesn't say as a result of Adam's sin or anything like that. And I think that's the point that you were
That was the point I was making. And I think Hugh makes an excellent point when you look at this passage from the perspective of physics and the intertwining of space-time. And indeed, time is described in the Bible as being a created quantity.
Now, Hugh, let's talk about some of those other passages. What other passages could help us need to be integrated with this one?
Well, you can go back to Genesis 2 and 3. Adam and Eve were eating before they sinned. They were working before they sinned. Both of those would be impossible activities without the law of decay. I mean, that's where work becomes possible in this realm, is through the second law of thermodynamics.
Now,
likewise, digestion.
Now talk to us about digestion. I don't, as a non-scientist, I don't associate digestion with much with the laws of gravity or magnetism or thermodynamics going on in my tummy.
Well, let's talk about the law of decay. It's a biblical reference to the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says that as time proceeds, the creation becomes more decayed, more disordered than it was in the past. We're proceeding from order to disorder, from less decay to more decay. Fundamentally, that's simply the outcome of the flow of heat from hot bodies to cold bodies. I mean, that's why things are breaking down. That's why we're getting increasing disorder. The universe is structured in such a way that heat does flow from hot bodies to cold bodies. And it's through the flow of heat from hot bodies to cold bodies that we have the potential to perform work. I mean, that's what happens inside your tummy, is that your body is taking advantage of this flow of heat from hot bodies to cold bodies to pull some energy out of that flow and perform useful work. And if it wasn't for that flow of heat, you wouldn't be able to digest, you wouldn't be able to perform any work at all. Because of that, we have decay going on. So it's our decay process that actually makes our physical lives possible.
Hugh, I'd actually backed it up even one step further. I mean, as a biochemist, I actually view entropy as being an organizing force. Now, that may seem contradictory because entropy clearly is leading to more disorder. But what's interesting is the molecules that are used to form cell membranes, which surround the cell and define life, proteins that fold into complex three-dimensional structures, DNA that folds into a double helix. None of that would be possible if it wasn't for the forces of entropy, because those very molecules that fold into these complex structures that aggregate to form cell membranes, when they're dissolved in water, they forces water into an ice-like structure, and that's a higher degree of order. And so in order for living systems to avoid that, you actually have these structures sequestering themselves away from water, and that drives organization. So you couldn't have the structures necessary for life at a molecular level without the forces of entropy. So, and that whole phenomena is referred to as the hydrophobic effect.
So that's a way that entropy could actually be viewed as a good thing.
So I would argue the fact that you have life prior to the fall means that there had to be entropy in operation in order to get these organizing forces being driven by entropy.
Okay.
So there is a decay in entropy even before this cataclysmic fall taking place.
Well,
Could I just emphasize Fuzz's point a little more? This is a principle that applies to all of creation. The second law of thermodynamics says that things are heading towards increasing disorder, but it's that flow to increasing disorder that allows us to order our world. I mean, that's what work is all about. What we're doing is we're creating greater disorder in certain parts of the universe than the second law would otherwise permit in order to get a little bit of order in our world. So like when you tidy up your garage, you expend a huge amount of energy that just gets dissipated to the universe in order to get a little more tidiness inside your garage. You may have to eat an extra hamburger to make that happen.
I want to just briefly list a couple of these textual clues we've talked about. One is digestion, and another one is one you just mentioned. There's work going on, and maybe a third one is the one you just mentioned, Fuzz, is that because the entropy is needed in order for complex life forms to exist on the surface of the planet.
Protein synthesis can't happen without that second law. And one I've argued from Genesis 1 is stars. Stars, like digestion, are extremely sensitive to the laws of physics. change the laws of physics ever so slightly, you're not going to get stars, or you certainly won't get the stars that are necessary for physical life to exist. And the Genesis text is very clear that stars are in existence before the fall of Adam and Eve. And they're in existence afterwards, too. It's not like you get a wholesale change.